notice that maybe they're not quite at the same level as the other children. We notice what the other children are doing. And sometimes it's not really clear if they're showing difficulties or it's just part of normal development that children develop at different stages. But often there can be something little that actually needs tweaking and changing. And so what I'm going to do is go through some of those challenges that children might face. Now, I'm a speech and language therapist, so my emphasis is going to be on language and communication and attention skills. And so bear with me on that. But the reason I say that is because actually children's learning is underpinned by their understanding, their focus, their ability to use language, as well as social interaction. So it's an important area to look at, and that's the area we're going to particularly be focusing on this morning. So the first thing I would say is that it's really common for children to show some weaknesses. And if you notice your child is struggling in an area, particularly of language and communication, but maybe behavior, you're not on your own. It's really common. And the estimation is at least 15% of a school population is going to be showing some form of speech, language, or communication needs. So if you've got a class of around 25 to 30, that might be 3 to 4 children, if my maths is correct. But if you've got a class of around 40 and your child's in a nursery class of around 40, then we're talking about 6 children. So that's quite a lot. And we're talking about real noticeable needs. So children have mild difficulties and many more. And sometimes behaviors that come up can be based on something else. And I'll give you an example. My son used to bite a lot when he was 2. He would bite. And he wasn't biting because he was angry with other children or aggressive. But if a child came near him, he would bite. And that was a real problem for me, because when I go to nursery, they'd say, oh dear, he's bitten again. And I saw an occupational therapist who said to me, look, he's sensory seeking around his mouth. Give him some crunchy foods. And I did that and he stopped biting straight away. And so sometimes there's something underneath that we need to recognize. Now, what I'm going to do now is give you some true and false questions. So you have a think about the first statement. Do more boys have speech, language, and communication needs than girls? What do you think? Well, the answer, interestingly, is true. They do. And it's around 5 to 2. So 5 boys to every 2 girls. The next one, are late talking children who are otherwise developing normally, do they always catch up without help? And the reason I put that there is because a lot of parents can say, well, look, my husband's mother or my mother said, I didn't talk till I was 6, or, if you give them a bit of time, they'll catch up. Well, if you leave things, it can cause more problems. So always look at why, do they always catch up? And the answer to that is false. As someone on the chat line realized, it was false. The next one, does bilingualism, exposing children to more than one language, does it cause a language delay in many children? And I'd have to say that's an absolute false, because bilingual or trilingual children go on to outperform monolingual children. And even though sometimes there can be a slight limiting in vocabulary in one of the languages, if you add the vocabulary up across the languages, they will usually be outperforming monolingual children. It is such a positive thing to speak more than one language. I wish I did. I have minimal Hindi, but I wish I was bilingual or trilinguals, because it really, the research shows they absolutely outperform other children. So when a child attends a preschool, are they more likely to do better later in life? What do you think? True or false? Does attending a preschool help children? Well, there's been some research and it says absolutely children who attend preschools are more likely to do better later in life. And they did a longitudinal longitudinal study, which showed even after school, adults were doing better. So very interesting. So the early years, what about, why am I saying it's important to pick things up early? Well, the early years are really important for children. And before I get into showing you some of the red flags and things that you need to focus on, I want to mention this because it's one of my pet things. It's really important in the early years to notice when your child may be struggling in an area and put something in place there, because for two reasons. One, because it can stop other issues developing that might be as an impact, have been impacted by that one area. But two, because children have what we call a critical learning period, and it's a time where learning is almost easier for them. And it's a stage, and it's a preschool stage. So it's around 2, they used to say 2 to 4, 2 to 6. And it's a really important stage for children. And so be aware of it. And just bear with me, because I have a slide that I love showing, and I'm going to show it here, because it just shows the science of what I've just said. And it's this is about the neuron branches in a child's brain at different ages. And it's looking at that learning activity. And if you can see at 24 months, a 2-year-old, there is dense learning activity. And then it eases off at 6 years of age. So we really need to make the most of that time. And recent research has shown that the experiences that children have at that early stage can change the shape of their brain and can change their cognitive levels that they reach in later life. So children's early experiences are really important. So just be really aware that what we input into our children at an early stage is shaping their future. And as I say, language and communication is foundational to this. So let's have a look. When I say language and communication, what different areas do I actually mean? What's involved? It's not just talking. What is actually involved? And I'm just going to whiz through some of the different things that are involved in language and communication. So for example, we need to be able to hear. And some children can have difficulties with their hearing. And if you notice that they're not picking up or responding, then it's really always important to get their hearing checked. Look, in communication, we need to be looking at people, and we'll talk more about eye contact and looking later. Attending, and this is a really important one, attention and concentration. And there is a correlation between a child's ability to attend and their cognitive potential. So their learning ability. So it's really important we focus on building our children's ability to attend. Processing is interesting. So processing is the ability to take in what you hear. You may be listening to me, but not taking it in. And processing is that taking in bit. Processing is something my husband doesn't do when he's watching the cricket. Retaining, our ability to remember information, our children's ability when we say to them, go in the other room and get your shoes, and they come back with their socks. So our ability to remember information. Understanding, and this is so important for the curriculum, that children learn to understand concepts, things like position words and quantity words that underpin their numeracy. And then interpreting nonverbal communication, that's really important. If I'm talking to someone and they are not happy with what I'm saying and they're looking cross, I need to work out they're looking cross so I can change what I'm saying. And some children have difficulty interpreting nonverbal communication. Empathy is really important, that your child learns to be empathetic. And empathy can develop as young as 3 or even 2 or 3. Children develop strands of empathy to more established empathetic responses when they're 4, and that's linked up with theory of mind, which we can mention. And then decide. It's really important that children learn how to make choices and have, it's important as parents that we give the opportunities to have choices. So that's a really important one. And then retrieving vocabulary, learning and thinking of vocabulary, creating sentences, organizing your ideas when you're talking or retelling a story. These are really all important skills. Our speech and articulation, our fluency, being fluent. And so when children are developing, they need to develop all these skills. And so if there's a problem in one of these areas, it's going to disrupt their learning. So let's take the first one. And the first one is attention skills. Now, the first aspect of this is sustaining attention. And that's something I hope you're going to do in this session, because it's so easy to go in and out of attention. If you were going to look at a child's attention span over a period of time, it's going to go up, down, up, down, up, down. And that's like us, you may listen to me for a bit and then look out of the window, or listen to me for a bit and then think about what you're going to have for lunch, or listen to me for a bit and then worry about something. So what we have to do is develop our child's ability to sustain their attention. And sustaining attention is linked with an area in the brain where children learn the motivation to reach goals. So it's a really important one. Integrating attention is how we integrate what we listen and do, so that we can actually listen and write at the same time, or listen and watch TV at the same time. Joint attention is where children learn to share attention. So that's where you're looking at a book with a child and they look from the book to you, they look up at you and they engage with you. So it's not just them and the toy, but it's them and you and the toy. It's like a triangle. And joint attention is a really important part of a child's attention skills, but also socialization. And then self-regulation, and that's that ability to stay alert. And sometimes if we're tired or we're hot or we're hungry, it can be hard to stay alert, or even get too alert. Some children can get too excited and too movement seeking, and some children can find it more difficult and become passive and go down. So let's look at the next slide. And the next slide is really about looking at how children's attention develops. And I'm going to go through this, and then I'm going to talk about some red flags with regards to attention, first of all. So your 1 to 2-year-old, if you've got a child in this range, I would expect a 1 to 2-year-old to be able to focus their attention on an activity of their own choosing. So maybe you've got a little boy and they love blocks or cars or something, and they really enjoy playing with those things. I would expect them to be able to sustain their attention. So for a few minutes, be able to play with something without moving off. And you can play alongside them and do that without taking over, really important. Then we've got our 2 to 3-year-olds, and this is where their attention is very single channeled. So what that means is if they're focused on something, excuse me, and they're very focused, it can be difficult for them to listen to anything else. And this is where parents will sometimes say to me, oh my goodness, my 2-year-old, I think he's got a hearing problem, because when he's playing with his car and I call him, he doesn't even turn away. And that's because their attention can be very rigid. But at 2 to 3, they're starting to be able to move their attention if they're prompted. But you may need to call their name or use a sharp intonation like, hey, or something, so they look away and look at you. But they can only do one thing at a time. And then 3 to 4 is that their attention is usually still single channeled. They can only do one thing at a time. But if you call them, they'll turn away quite easily and look at you. It's a time where it's really important for you to get their attention before you give them an instruction. So if they're playing, make sure you get their attention first. And I know in schools, a lot of nursery teachers will use lots of different strategies like clapping hands or ringing a bell or making a sound to get children's attention. And then 4 to 5 is where they can do more than one thing at a time. And that's really important for school because they may be drawing or writing or coloring, and they can listen to the teacher at the same time. And that's so important at that stage. So that is something that happens at that 4 to 5 years of age. And then at 5 years, they should be able to do several things at the same time, have fully integrated attention skills. It's like we say, we say women can multitask. They can do more than one thing at a time. And that's so important that children can do more than one thing at a time. So what are some of the red flags with regards to attention skills? That firstly, if you've got a 2-year-old and they can't settle on an activity then at all, and you're noticing they're flitting from one activity to the next and they won't settle for 2 to 3 minutes on anything, then I would try and put something in place to help them. If you've got a 3-year-old who won't let you direct them, so you want to sit down and look at a book with them that you've chosen, and they won't tolerate that. They'll only do what they want to do. So look, some 3-year-olds always want to do what they want to do, but they can still be able to tolerate an adult directing them. And that's important. So make sure that there are times when that 3-year-old can let you direct them. And if you've got a 3-year-old that can't transition, now again, if a child's playing with their most favorite toy, it's going to be hard to transition. But if you notice they always can't transition. So be aware of your children's attention skills. How can we develop them? Well, look, if you want to help your child sustain their attention, be really aware of what interests them and introduce things that interest them. It's so much easier to sustain our attention on something that's interesting. Create environments that are distraction-free where possible. And what's important here is that you don't have toy rooms that are covered with loads of toys all over the floor. Try and put things in boxes. Try and bring out 1 or 2 things at a time, because if you've got loads of things, it's very easy to flit from one thing to the next. And then be aware too, if your child is playing and you sit down and start talking to them, you'll disrupt their attention. And sometimes it's best just to sit near them, but don't actually talk to them. At some point, if they're say 4 or 3 or 4, you can start talking to them. But a younger child, it will affect their attention because they have to break away from what they're playing to listen to you, to go back, and we want them to sustain their attention. And redirect them back. Also structure and routine. With therapy, speech and language therapy and occupational therapy now being online because of lockdown, some children have had to learn how to focus on a therapy session on an iPad or on a computer. And some parents have said, oh my goodness, I'm finding it really hard. But as soon as they start putting in a routine every day where a child sits down and looks at a book with them or does something particular in a certain place in the house, on a certain chair at the same time, that routine really impacts a child and helps them to be able to develop their attention and talk about first and next. So understanding is really important. And what does understanding mean? It's understanding different concepts, words relating to size, position, colors, shapes. And it's important that we watch that our children can develop their understanding. And, it builds. So an understanding of a child of around 1 to 2, by the age of 2 years, a child will usually have an understanding of around 300 words. And what's amazing is around that age of 2 to 3, children are developing their understanding of words by 1 new word every day. So every day, your child will be understanding a new word because they are building this massive vocabulary that they're going to have. So it's looking at what are they learning today? What new word have they started to understand today? And it might be an action word or a noun or something, but every day they will usually, on average, develop a new word. A child of 2 years should be able to, 2 to 3 years, should be able to remember 2 things. So if you send them, if you've got a group of toys on the floor and you say, get me the car and the book, they should be able to go there and get those 2 things and bring them back to you. So a child between 2 and 3 should be able to remember 2 things when you say it once. A child of 2 to 3 should be able to understand function. So if you say, can you find me something to eat? They don't come back with a book or a plate. They come back with something edible. Or can you find me something to wear? Then they'll come back with clothes. So they start to understand what the functions of things. And then words, they're starting to understand between 2 and 3, words like size words, big, little, in, on, under, those sorts of concept words. By 4, children are usually able, 3 to 4, follow an adult's conversation and respond to more complex directions. And then by 5, they have quite a broad vocabulary. So what are concerns? So if you've got a child of 3 years and they can't, they find it difficult to go and get more than one thing. They can't hold more than one thing in their mind at any time. So if you say, pick up the ball and the shoe, and they just come back with one thing. What's another thing? If they're really not developing those understanding of concepts. So again, you've got a child who's 3 to 4, and they're not understanding things like big and little, or in, on, under, or next, or later. If you've got a child of 4-year-old who doesn't understand things like who, where, what questions. So if you say where's your shoe, and they don't understand that word where, or who is it in the photo, and they say park, because they don't understand that word who. So really important that children understand those sorts of words. Or you've got a child who's just not responding to directions. As long as it's not their attention skills, it might be their understanding. And it's really important to look at this, because we can develop a child's understanding. It's so easy to develop it. Now, one of the first ways is I've put here as objects of reference. So when I'm talking to a young child, I will use objects. So for example, if you say, do you want a drink? And you hold up a cup. Or let me think of another one. We're going to go in the car, and you hold up the keys. Or we're going to wash our hands, and you hold up the soap. So bring in objects of reference, because it's so much easier for children to understand words when there is an object there, and they link that object with the word, which really helps. So I put their frequency and location, because when children hear the same word in the same situation, and they are more likely to learn that word. And I think they say that children should hear the same word in the same situation around 400 times, which is massive. And so they need to hear that word several hundred times before they will learn it. But it's going to be harder if you change the word. So one day you say, do you want your cup, or do you want your mug, or do you want your drink? Try and keep the same word so they learn those words. Gestures can always help as well. And excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink. Gestures are really important. So if I say big, it's going to make more sense than if I just say big. And I hope you can see me, otherwise this won't make sense. If I say little, it's going to make more sense to a child if I'm using a gesture. So use gestures, even in or on. Those gestures really help children's learning and help their understanding. Practicing memory tasks. It might be that you've heard me say, look, a child should be able to get one object or two objects if they're 3 years old. And your child doesn't do that. They only get one object. You can practice it. Practicing is amazing, because actually when children practice things like that, they can learn it really quickly. So do give your children lots of opportunities to go and get you objects around the house. Sometimes say, can you get me 2 things? Or sometimes say, can you get me something I can eat? And see what they come back with. Do they get a shoe? In which case you need to practice a bit more. But there's some great things you can do to actually just practice these skills with children. The other thing I'm saying here is, we want children to understand past, present, and future. And to do that, they need to have a visual point of reference. They need to have a familiar sequence. So they need to know, they need to be able to visualize what they did in the past and what they're going to do in the future. And they do that by having a familiar routine. So really what I'm saying here is having a familiar routine will help children with the understanding of past, present, and future, and is really important. So what about talking? Let's think about talking. So let's think of the normal development in a child's talking. So the first words with a child usually emerge between 12 and 18 months. Now, by words, it could be symbolic sounds. It could be the child's own version of a word. So it could be brum brum for car, or it could be my grandchildren call different things. It might be yum yum for food, or it might be lots of different words that you've got that the child uses that may not sound like the adult form, but they're still words. So the first few words usually emerge between 12 and 18 months. By 18 months, we'd like to see 20 to 50 words, can be 20. By 2 years, we're looking at for around 100 words. And that may sound an enormous amount, but actually probably if you sat down and counted animal sounds and all sorts of different words, you probably could get near there, and have 2 to 3 word phrases. At 3 years, a child has around a vocabulary of about 1,000 words. They might be using 4 to 5 word phrases, and things like pronouns will be emerging. So I, me, you, they, he, she. And they'll use different action words. And by 4 years, they're going to be using more complex sentences. They'll use things like because, I want my toy because it's my turn. So they'll be using things like and because more regularly. So what are red flags to do with expressive language? Well, first, if you've got a child who's not putting words together at all and they're 2 years of age, they should be. So that's an important one that they're putting. And when I say red flags sound like such a scary red flags, it just means what I'm saying here is it's good to give them a bit of support in this area. And it might be that you do that by looking up and finding some great activities, or if what we would love is to be able to give you some advice from a speech and language therapist or a psychologist to give you some ideas of things that can be worked on. So a limited vocabulary. So if at this stage, the child has a very limited vocabulary at 2 years or 3 years of age, and you notice that they use words like it and thing, and they just haven't got their vocabulary. If at 4 years of age, they're not using conjunctions, so that's words like and or because, then they should be using that by that time. And then at 5, they can't tell you about something that's happened or tell a story. And those are things that really are important because they're going to be important for their learning. So be aware whether their child has those things or not. So how can we develop a child's expressive language? So as I said before, frequency and location. Using the same words in the same place will help them. So you can try and trigger those words so they get ready and they get used to saying that word at the same time. Modeling and extending. What do I mean by that? So if the child says juice, you say, I want juice. So you model what they should have said and you extend it. You make it a bit longer. Having special time. Special time is so important that you can sit down with your child. If you've got lots of children, try if you can give each child special time that you can go through a book together Special time will have a huge impact on your child's communication as well as their well-being and their attachment and their confidence. So it's such an important time that they feel that time is their time. Gestures are really important, as I mentioned before, because you can trigger language. So you can say, the child says car, you can say, yes, it's a, and do a big gesture of big hands. So they say big car. Elicitation rather than demand, and this is really important. I say to parents, don't say to your children, say this. So many parents will say to the children, say this to granny or to nanny, or say this. Try not to do that. You might listen to yourself and find yourself saying say. Demanding children to speak may get them to say things in the short term, but in the long term can lead to them withdrawing from communication. So it's really important to elicit. What do I mean by elicit? So rather than say you show them a picture of a dog or show them a pen and say pen, you actually change it to it's a, and then try and get them to elicit it that way. It's a, and see if they'll say pen. And it might be, dog. It's a dog. What is it? It's a, and try and elicit it that way rather than say dog. Even, goodbye, you model goodbye. Oh, look, it's time to say, and use your intonation to elicit words. Songs and rhymes are a great way of eliciting words. As are, going through books together, looking and asking appropriate questions when looking at storybooks with children. And we've got some great ideas for questions you ask with different books. So do contact us at London Learning Centre and contact me, and I'll give you some lovely ideas and resources for that. Sorting categories, really important that children learn what categories different vocabulary is in, because it helps them to retrieve that vocabulary better. So speech sounds. So just really to say about this, children develop speech sounds just in the same way that they develop vocabulary, they develop walking motor skills. Speech sounds develop in an order. A child at 2 won't necessarily say all the speech sounds they need to say. And as you can see there's a chart. So, your 2-year-old may not have sounds like S or F, or they might say doc for sock. And actually it's all right when they're 2, but by 3, they should be using the S and F sound. And children of 3 may not use L sounds. So they might say, it's a, they might say, I'm trying to think of an L word, it's a lion instead of a lion. And it's quite common that children may use W instead of L at that stage. So just look at that pattern and realize that your child may not be using all the sounds they need to use at the age they're at. And don't worry about it if they're not. However, if you have a 3-year-old and they're not using the final sounds in words, so instead of saying cat, they might say ca, or instead of saying bird, they might say burr. They should be using final sounds at 3. If they're not using things like F or S or K at G at 3, they should be. So doing some listening activities, if you're, if they still continue not to show those sounds, referring them to a speech and language therapist is important. And there's some great resources online. You can do some great listening tasks with them as well. If your child is not intelligible in and out of context by 4 years, I would expect them to be. And if they're not, they may need some help. And if they're non-fluent, so if they've got some fluency problems. Now, it's quite common for children at 3 and 4 to be non-fluent. So they say, mummy, 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 I want to go out, because they're trying to think of what they want to say, or where are we going? But if you have a child that gets stuck on a sound, so they go where, or if you have a child that prolonged sounds, so where are we going, or blocks where they can't get a sound out at all, then please do refer them to a speech and language therapist because they need some help. Okay, so what about social communication? So we're coming, you know, we're going to come to an end soon, but let's look at social communication because it's so important. And you can think social communication is actually out of our, you know, it's not something that we can affect. A child is either sociable or they're not, or they're either good at social skills or they're not. That is actually not true at all, because children can develop their social skills with your help and with the help of professionals as well. So it's good to monitor their development of social communication to just pick up if they're struggling. And I put some milestones there, but there are many different milestones. So this is just to give you an idea. You know, at 1, a child's going to use a vocalization to get your attention. So they're not just vocalizing because they're playing with sounds. They're vocalizing because they want you to interact with them. So they'll make a ah, and then they'll look at you because they're wanting your attention. So they're directing their vocalizations to an adult. At 18 months, you might see some nonverbal communication, like waving. In fact, waving can start a lot earlier at 1 or even under 1 sometimes. But at 18 months, I'd like to see waving. Because again, waving is about social referencing and about showing social intent to someone else. It's waving and looking. So waving for a reaction, maybe putting their hands up to be picked up. They want that social response. At 2 years, they're pointing out objects in their environment. So, oh, car or dog or something. They'll point something out that they find interesting just to share interest with you. And they will look from the object to you because they're interested in how you respond. So that's, I mentioned before, that triangle in. At 2.5, they're starting to engage in a little simple conversation with you, like, where's your nose? And they might point to their nose and say, and then they might point to your nose and say, your nose. And then you might go back and say, where's your ears? And it goes backwards and forwards, and they can have a simple interaction with you where it's not just you asking the questions, it's them initiating as well. At 3 years, they will come and initiate a conversation with a familiar adult. So they might come and show you something or engage with you with something. So they're initiating. And usually they often will do it before 3 years, but if they're not, it's important they're doing it at 3 years. 3.5, they might start talking about how they're feeling. I feel cross or I feel sad. 4 years, that conversation is going on so much better, and you can have a backwards and forwards conversation. And 5, this is an interesting one, that children start, and this is this area of empathy, that children start to be able to change how they're talking according to who they're talking to. So if they're talking to a baby, they might go, oh, baby. So they're talking in a slightly different way. And they might be a little bit more self-conscious when talking with someone unfamiliar. So looking at that then, what are red flags with social communication? You know, I think parents are really good at picking this one up, because sometimes our children can do things that are embarrassing in public, and that's normal. You know, I could give you a long list of things that my children have done in public, which were extremely embarrassing. But you can pick up when behaviors are as inappropriate, and you know your child hasn't understood the social situation. Other things are things like where they, and people put so much emphasis on eye contact, and please don't, because eye contact, a child not using eye contact can be for lots of reasons. It does not mean they're autistic. And children cannot use eye contact because they're shy, embarrassed. They cannot use eye contact because their attention is poor, and they're not, you know, they're running around doing other things. But if they consistently don't use eye contact when talking to people, when they don't understand how close you could stand to people. And this is around 5-year-olds, 4 or 5-year-olds, where they really can't turn take, where they will hug a stranger, where they don't respond to facial expression. You can usually pick up when a child is struggling and they need some help in that area. Another one there, you know, difficulties understanding the emotions of someone else. So it's really important that children learn how to do that. So what are some really important things we can do with social communication? Firstly, reinforce any social referencing. And so that's why if your child looks and smiles, really important to give an exaggerated response so they find that really rewarding. Create family jokes. It's really important in your family that you have simple social routines and what I call family jokes. So it might be a particular social routine they do every time they wake up. You play peekaboo, or every time, you know, daddy comes in the house, you hide and then jump out. But create these social routines and family jokes, because they will really help your child with social intent and social interest. And it's really important that they enjoy activities for social reasons, not because it's got an iPad or an iPhone in it. Modeling taking turns, play games and support them with taking turns. Talk about feelings and label them. You know, I really say to parents, bring in the language of emotions into your family home. It is so important that you talk about feelings. We expect children to be able to explain how they're feeling, but then we don't explain how we're feeling. And so they need to hear it and have it modeled in their home environment. So, you know, when we talk about how we're feeling, it's really important for our well-being, and it really helps us. And we need to help children that way. It will help them to self-regulate and calm down if they can talk about how they're feeling. So use the language emotions. I'm feeling a bit tired today, or I'm feeling a bit sad today because this happened, or I'm feeling really excited about doing this. So use language of emotions. You can develop children's empathy and social skills in a role play, pretend play. Oh, baby's feeling sad, or baby's feeling sick. Should we give baby a cuddle? So you can really build their empathy skills through pretend play. And one of the things I would say here is support their social understanding rather than their behavior. I think with our children, it's so easy to focus on behavior. And this really, I just want to say to you, it's not the right way. You need to focus on the understanding that's beneath that behavior, the triggers that are beneath that behavior, and then focus on the behavior. But probably what will happen is if you focus on the triggers for that behavior and their understanding, the behaviors will resolve themselves anyway. So look at things like, for example, you know, explaining why we should do certain things. So rather than saying, you know, you must take turns, you say, you know, giving Johnny a turn will make him feel really happy, and he's going to love you and want to play with you again. So it's talking around why. Think why when you're teaching social skills. You know, you must look at me so I know you're listening. You must look at me because it makes me know you want to talk to me. So explain why. Don't just say, look at me. Explain why. And obviously that's with a child that's a bit older, 4 to 5 year olds. So that's really important. And then, so I've got a message, please check connectivity. So I hope you can still hear me. And I can certainly, oh dear, I hope you can hear me. Right, I'm going to keep going. Then the next one is, finally here, is a social story. And actually, oh, now it's fine, good. A social story. And so and I can't see myself now, so I hope you can see me. I'm sitting in England, and I don't have anyone who's good at technology with me, so I hope you can still hear me. Look, this is a social story, and this is really about me talking about, I know my video has gone, and I don't know why. Someone's just said my video is gone. I don't know why it's gone, and I don't know how to get it back. So if anyone's got any ideas of how I can get it back, that would be amazing. Turn on the video. Maybe I've turned it off. Turn on. Oh, yes, I have turned it on. Let me do, oh. Can you see me again? Yes. Okay, let's hope you can see me. So, right, so I'm back on. This is just a simple social story, and it's just really to illustrate how social understanding is really important. So, you know, it's a child who, this was written for a child who didn't smile very much. And, you know, it's really important that children smile, and they didn't understand when someone smiled at you, it's nice to smile back. So it's a simple story to develop the understanding. And you can write a social story about anything really, but most people like smiles. When people smile, the corners of their mouth go up and their teeth show. A smile means I'm happy. A smile means I'm enjoying myself. A smile may mean I want to talk to you. So it's just showing the child, if you smile at someone, it means you want to talk to them. Most of the time, when someone smiles, it means something nice. I'm going to smile at my friends when I see them. So it's just saying, rather than saying to a child, you must smile, smile, explain why and teach social understanding. So I'm now coming to my last slide. And my last slide is really just to mention here that we are from, and I'd love to take any questions if you have any. One was, can I get a recording? I'm sure that can be arranged. I'm from London Learning Centre, and I'm the clinical director there. And I've put the details up of London Learning Centre because if you would like to, you have any questions, or you want to talk about your child, or you want to get some advice, then do email us on info@llc.org.in and put it for my attention, Jackie, and I will come back to you. The telephone numbers are there for if you want to call us. As I say, at the moment in lockdown, we're doing online sessions, but online is a great way if you don't live near us to be able to link up, which is fantastic. Our website is there. I've also shown you there some ARCs. We connected to ARC Pathway. London Learning Centre is connected to ARC Pathway, which is a way that parents can screen their children. And so I put that there, and you can see different ARCs showing their development, the development of children, and you can ask us more about that or join our Facebook page. But if you have any questions, then do put them on. And I'm hoping that I can see questions. Right, let me see if I can do this. Hi, Jackie, let me see how I can find these. Ah, here. Hey, I'm in. Okay, okay. So my daughter is 4 years old, someone's saying, and she loses concentration, or like when coloring, won't finish it. Look, what's really important, as I said before, is to set a routine and structure. So try and make sure there aren't too many other distractions around. Give your child a coloring picture that has an end. So don't give her a picture that she needs to finish coloring. So not a huge amount. So it might be, you know, a picture of a house, and give her some coloring pens and say, can you finish this? And when you finish this, we're going to have a biscuit together, or we're going to have a treat together. So you build in a little bit of a treat at the end. And if she tries to get down and finish before she's finished coloring, then redirect her back and say, hey, you haven't finished. So try and get her used to finishing things. Do a puzzle that has an end. What she needs to do is develop the ability to finish things completely. So anything that has a definite end. You can also use timers. There are some great egg timers that are for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so having a timer is great. But if she's 4 years old, try and get her to do something for 3 to 4 minutes initially, then move up to 5 minutes, and make sure there's an end at the end. Are there any other questions? I'm just having a look at whether I have missed anything. Oh, there's lots. Okay. My son is 2.7, very energetic. Yes, he can throw toys. How do I change this action? So look, it's really important that children have movement sessions. So try and think about having times where you say, oh, this is jumping time, running time, and go and have some jumping and running times, and then have settling times. So set up places that are settle playing places in your home. So maybe some cushions on the floor with his favorite toys, and don't have too many toys out at a time. Have one toy. So if he throws it, there's nothing else there. So he's got to go and get it. So just try and have certain places that are settling places and running places. And then try and make sure there aren't too many toys around. My son is 2-year-old, and my son he does listen and likes to ask me. However, he hasn't learned 200 words yet. So don't worry if your 2-year-old hasn't got 200 words, that's fine. If they've got sort of 50 or less, then I would speak to someone and get some support. If they've got around 100 words, that's fine, but start targeting them. Think, I'm going to work on animals this week. So all this week, we're going to look at pictures of animals in books, and we're going to find some animal toys, and we're going to practice 5 different animals. And then next week, I'm going to do food. And then next week, I'm going to do body parts. So try and target certain words, and just be aware of whether they are learning those words or not. And if they're really struggling to learn those words, then do talk to us about it. So we've got someone here who is a child that's not interested in books. You know, try and watch what your children are interested in. So look at what your child, are they interested in Peppa Pig? Are they interested in cars? Try and choose books that your children are interested in. Use pop-up books, use flap books where they lift the flap. Make sure then you're not expecting the child to sit down and listen to you reading a story. If you've got a 2-year-old, it is not the time to be reading a long story to them. It's about looking at the pictures, getting them to point. To start off with, they can turn the pages over, and use those books that are card pages so that they can turn those pages over quite quickly, and make sure you finish them. Now we've got someone here who's 2.5 and their pronunciation isn't clear. So what I suggest you do is at 2.5, it's quite common that children's pronunciation isn't clear. But what we can send you some slides, maybe the slides of my talk today, or one of those slides, so you can see what sounds they should be doing at different ages. So email us and we can send you that, what sounds they should be doing at different ages. Okay, so I've got lots of different questions here. My daughter is 2 years, 9 months, and she doesn't respond to no. It's, you know, children will pick up, you know, sometimes we can, and I've done this with my children and my grandchildren, that I say no, and they don't respond, and I make some sort of reaction that they actually like. So it might be a pretend cross face, it might be that I've laughed. So you need to be really careful how you respond to children. So if you are saying no, it's a very serious face no, and you move them away from what you don't want them to do. and try and not laugh or give them any sort of response that's reinforcing, because once you've done it once, it's very hard to change it. Okay. Okay, so we've got children that are a lot of these are related to how can I get my children to focus? So I really would go back to what I said before, because it's really important. And that is that you, and I'm looking because I'm getting messages here, and that is that, okay, I'm getting lots and lots of questions here. That is that you build in structure and routine. So even look, there's a 7-year-old here, and it's really important, particularly in lockdown, because it's so easy not to have a routine. I get up, I have breakfast, and at a certain time, maybe a bell goes off, I sit on a certain chair in a certain place, and I have a timer. And during that timer, I'm doing some particular work. At the end of that timer, and make it short first of all, and then build. And when that timer goes, I do something really exciting. If I get down before then, I don't do that exciting task. But build in structure and routine. Do it every day, same time, same place, and sit with them if you need to. Don't talk to them, sit next to them, and try and build in that structure and routine. If that doesn't work, do contact us, because we would be really happy to talk to you about things that we can put in place and maybe do an online session with you. And as I say, this is the great thing about online sessions, is we can do that. Okay, let me see. We've got 1 minute left. Let me see if there are any more questions that I can answer here. Lots and lots of questions. Do write them in, please, if you would like to. A child that says cack instead of car, that's unusual. I would be looking at, does he put a K at the end of other words? Is it just car? And we can practice, I would practice saying R with him, just straight R, and then put the K at the beginning, then practice saying car. It'd be interesting to know what age he is. If he's tiny, children do mispronounce words, unless he's putting K at the end of most words. Someone there saying, can we get this presentation? I'm sure we can arrange for that. Okay, well, look, it's been lovely talking to you. I think I've come to the end of my time. Please do email us. Please do contact us at London Learning Centre if you want any information. And please do join Art Pathway Facebook page. Love to see you on there. And if you want to know more about the screening, then we can let you know there as well. Lovely to talk to you. And I really hope it was useful and that I didn't drop out or my video didn't go. But thank you for listening. Take care. Goodbye.